For cycling fans, Christmas comes in July. Yes, it's that time of year again. Time for the Tour de France. And we are set to break this year's edition down, covering all the major stories. Steve Schlanger with Bob Roll, who apparently is not dressed for Christmas services, as you can tell. Bob, you got a T-ball game later or something? What's the deal?
It's the beer league coming up. Come on.
Beer league. It's one of the most competitive in the city.
It is. It is very tough. Absolutely.
Well, speaking of competition, it kicks off in Brussels this year for the Tour de France. And the biggest story of them all is the absence of the four-time Tour winner, Chris Froome. He crashed recently at the Critérium du Dauphiné. Some serious injuries. He's out for the rest of this season. But in his absence at the Tour specifically, who is now the favorite?
Well, Geraint Thomas, you got to say, is the favorite. Defending champion, Team Ineos, the best team in the race. That doesn't change with the loss of Chris Froome. They were going to come in as co-leaders, last year's winner Geraint Thomas, and the four-time winner Chris Froome for Team Ineos. And now Geraint Thomas is the preemptive sole leader of the team. It will be less complicated perhaps for Team Ineos without having two leaders, and maybe some encouragement from the rest of the field of favorites in the Tour de France this year. Maybe not. Geraint Thomas was spectacular in last year's Tour. Might not change all that much for the competitors for the yellow jersey in the Tour de France.
Well, that team obviously has had a stranglehold on the yellow jersey, but as far as the rest of the podium and beyond Geraint Thomas, who are some of the other primary contenders?
Well, I like the way Nairo Quintana's been riding this year. He's looked very sharp in the Dauphiné. Adam Yates is riding really well. Thibaut Pinot has been really solid this whole year since winning one of the monuments, the Tour of Lombardia, a one-day race, but very hilly. And Thibaut Pinot looking the best amongst the French contenders that include Guillaume Martin, Romain Bardet, and some of the other French riders. But Thibaut Pinot, Adam Yates, and Nairo Quintana looking very solid.
Romain Bardet is always the big French hope, but he's always undone by the time trial. There's less time trialing miles in this year's edition. Does he have any hope?
Well, the problem for Romain Bardet and Thibaut Pinot is the team time trial on just number stage 2. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost over a minute to Geraint Thomas from Team Ineos. That's a big disadvantage so early in the race. Hypothetically, Geraint will get some more time in the individual time trial, like you said also. So if you start the Pyrenees and the Alps a minute and a half, 2 minutes behind Geraint Thomas, it makes it very tough to think you're going to beat him somehow before we get back to Paris. So team time trial and individual time trial in this year's race course are going to make it very tough on both Bardet and Thibaut Pinot.
Richie Porte has been one of the marquee names the last few years, but bizarrely, he has crashed out on stage 9 each of the last 2 editions. What are his chances?
I think he's riding well enough to be a pre-race favorite, but I feel like he's unproven at this point, and he has to prove himself. And I'm going to say that he's capable of being on the podium, but that remains to be seen, and he's going to have to race at a different level than he has been and be able to absorb the pressure that being a team leader means. So far, he hasn't shown he's able to do that. I hope he can do that, but I just don't think it's going to happen for Richie Porte in a 3-week Grand Tour. I don't think that he's capable of being focused and angry enough for the whole 3 weeks. 1 week, no problem. He's competitive in any race on the calendar, but the Grand Tours, that might be one climb too far for Richie Porte.
Okay, well, where will he finish?
He's perfectly capable of the top 10 if everything goes perfectly. He's a good time trialist, fantastic climber. It's just the length and the exposure to danger and how you get nervous and then make mistakes. To keep it together for 3 weeks is the main Achilles heel for Richie Porte.
Well, the biggest stage for the best sprinters in the world is always at the Tour de France, at the Champs-Élysées on the final day in particular, but missing 2 high-profile names this year. Marcel Kittel, who may end up retiring from the sport, we're still waiting to see. And as far as Mark Cavendish, he's not missing physically, but his results have been missing. He hasn't won in 2 years. So, given the absence of results from Kittel, from Cavendish, who's the top sprinter?
Oh, that is there is a feeding frenzy for the fastest of the other riders. And I would include Andre Greipel in the list of the best sprinters historically. But he's been way off the mark So I would put him in the same category as Mark Cavendish at the moment. So beyond them, I think Elia Viviani will be a big name to reckon with, and Dylan Groenewegen from the Jumbo squad. Viviani, maybe the best lead out on the De Koenig squad. He's done the Tour de France once in his career, but many years ago, and not since he's established himself as one of the best sprinters in the game. I'm watching for Elia Viviani. He didn't have a great Giro. He was decent, got disqualified from the one stage he did win to Caleb Ewan, who is another name to include. But those two riders, Groenewegen and Viviani, I think are going to be the dominant sprinters in this year's Tour de France.
As far as the green jersey competition, that has been basically Peter Sagan's entire wardrobe every July for as far as you can remember. Is it going to be the same this year?
Yes, that's not going to change on this race course particularly. Hey, a lot of the sprinters won't even find the time limit on a number of the mountain stages, but Peter's always there in the climbs. And he can improvise as needed throughout the race. If he needs more points, he goes in the breakaway, gets the intermediate sprint. And the way it's set up is perfect for Peter Sagan. I don't see anybody beating him in that competition as long as he's in the Tour de France for the foreseeable future.
Not even Michael Matthews?
No, no way.
Can Matthews get close?
No.
Okay.
No, Matthews is not as dynamic, not as powerful, not as quick in the pure sprints, and not as able to go day in, day out as many times as he needs to in the breakaway, like Peter Sagan can do. He's a remarkable, phenomenal athlete, and it's a real joy to watch him racing.
One of the big revelations in the professional cycling ranks so far this season has been the three-time cyclocross world champion, Wout van Aert, who is about to race his first ever Tour de France. He's won a couple of stages already at the big prep race in the Critérium du Dauphiné, a time trial, a field sprint. What do you expect from him at the Tour, though?
Wow, that is he's only done a couple of stage races in his whole life.
Not only first Tour de France, first Grand Tour of any kind.
First Grand, that's going to be a great story. I think as long as Steven Kruijswijk is in the frame on the GC, Wout van Aert will be asked to do a lot of the teamwork to keep Kruijswijk near the top of the GC, which is very possible. Kruijswijk's had a great spring. He's had a fantastic set of results in his career. Never had the luck putting it 100% together in the Tour de France. But if he's doing that, I think that Van Aert will have to be working for him most of the day. And that might take away a little bit of his power to go for the green jersey, time trial, and stage wins.
When you consider the course over the 21 stages, what is most compelling about the way the route is laid out?
Stage 5, brutal, so early. There's going to be GC days, team time trial stage 2, and Planche de Belleville stage 5, and then a time trial stage 13, followed by the Tourmalet. So the first part of the tour is really hard, and then the 3 days in the Alps, absolutely brutal, including and especially the last day in the Alps, second to last day of the whole race to Val Thorens. That is going to be a massive GC battle. So those two parts of the tour, 3 parts really, the team time trial and the Planche de Belleville in the first few days, and of course the time trial in the Tourmalet, and then the Alps. That will tell the tale in this year's Tour de France.
Race starting in Brussels, spending the first couple of days in Belgium. What do you expect from those first few days as the race just kicks off?
Bunch of field sprints, bunch of crashes, some GC guys losing their chance to win because of those crashes that are inevitable, and some big time gaps because of the team time trial on stage number 2.
All right, well, the final rosters are still not out. We don't know who is exactly riding for what team at the Tour, but as far as the American stories, who are you expecting to see that could be interesting in July?
Going to be great to see Ben King at the Tour de France. He's done it before, but last year he had 2 stage wins in the Vuelta from the breakaway, and I think that's going to happen a lot in this year's Tour de France. So team dimension data, if they do bring Ben King to the Tour de France, that, for me, is the American most likely to win a stage in this year's Tour. It'll be interesting to see how TJ Van Garderen does in the overall standings. The course is not that bad for TJ. A lot of long, gradual, pulverizing, grinding climbs, and of course that pivotal individual time trial on stage number 13 that he should be able to do very well at.
There's always a surprise of some kind at the Tour. It's kind of the signature hallmark, and it's always hard to call, but going in, a rider or a stage that could be the sneaky element to determining this year's Tour de France?
Well, stage 5, I think, could be a big stage, and a rider that is maybe a little bit under the radar, a guy like Egan Bernal. He's in the breakaway. The other favorites let him go, and he gets an advantage. and he can certainly climb with the best on stage number 5. That would be a rider that I'm going to be really interested in. Last year he was in the Tour, he had some very good days in the mountains. He was there to help Froome and Geraint Thomas. That won't change too much, but without Chris Froome, he might have a little bit more leeway to really do the best that he can do. So watch for him to be spectacular in the big mountains.
Should be fun.
Should be a blast, as always.
Make sure you join us for our live daily coverage. Things kick off in Brussels, Belgium this year. Bob Roll on his way to the Beer League softball game, and then it's off to the Tour de France.